Hello, part 2 with James. This week on Leading Our Own Way, I asked myself a question. Oh, it's not even a question, but stepping into independence is never easy, and I've found that as well, right? We all have, especially when the world tells you that you won't make it. I feel like that's what you hear all the time. I'm a product of that, hear the podcast. I hear people all the time, why are you doing a podcast? What are you doing it for? Anyway, here in part 2, James shares how his early experiences shaped his understanding of resilience, personal growth, and the importance of pushing forward. And, the importance of pushing boundaries, I suppose. James is definitely one that likes to have pushed boundaries. From the challenges of his, him navigating social skills to the moment that forced him to adopt and evolve. This conversation, I suppose, is a reminder. It's a powerful reminder that growth comes from discomfort, and that's something I'm always saying. We've become too comfortable. Comfortable is the acceleration of death, right? Death by comfort. I've interviewed Paul Taylor, the neuroscientist, the author of Death by Comfort. We talk about this a lot. So let's get ready for James, because we're going to, hopefully we'll inspire you to keep moving forward no matter what really stands in your way. Well, here's James. Well, you've been very busy, obviously, clearly, since you've moved to Australia. Yeah. So I'm going to circle back to that independence, because it kind of makes sense why you've done what you've done. And I would like to touch base on the manager side of the with Simon. You did bring up Simon Sinek before, and I adore Simon. He looks at the human side of leadership, which I very much do.
He does. Also. I think he's great.
Yeah. And I've quoted him in my book, How to Lead with Purpose, as well. I absolutely love him. I love what he stands for. That human side of leadership, then, where are you attracted to Simon's philosophies then?
I like that he, as a business leader and an industry leader by extension, I like that he looks at the personal side of business, not just the KPI side of business like most people look at.
Yeah.
So most business leaders are driven by numbers, and it makes sense because, numbers show the truth, right? Numbers don't lie. But I feel like he gives the people that work for him an actual chance on a human level, and not just on a business level. And actually, the other person that does that is Stephen Bartlett. So he was actually, I saw something from Stephen Bartlett the other day, which is he's hiring for I think it was a happiness manager for his company, and the only requirements were basically to keep the employees happy and healthy. That was their entire job.
Love that. I could have done that.
Yeah, I could have done that. I don't have the time, but I could have done it otherwise. But again, it's somebody else who kind of gets it, and then like, business isn't just about business. It's not just about making clients happy. It's not just about making money. It's not about growing a business. It's also about having the people that work for you stick around for a long time. Employees leave because, well, for many reasons, but unhappiness is definitely at the top of that list. People don't leave comfortable places. Why would you? It's not in human's nature. So, that's why I like Simon Sinek.
Yeah, me too. I love that whole ring the towel scenario when he says, you're trying to wring as much as you can out of the people. You're trying to get as much the water out of that towel to get it dry, and then you start again. And it's whether it's quarterly, it's annually, and it's metrics that are not measured. Even though you could measure probably trust, but he talks about that metric system, performance versus trust, and hiring a manager that's a high performer but of low trust. Yes. And I really love that metric. And he said, look, usually the best managers to hire is either the low performer of high trust.
Low performers, high trust, yeah.
Or medium. But obviously this person up here of high trust and high performance is very, very, very rare. It's 1 in a million. If you can get that, it's gold, of course. But it's not very often that you come across that type of person because of the personality traits that go into high performers, unfortunately.
Yeah. And people who are high performers and low trust are typically what most companies refer to as their all-stars. So they're the people who are absolutely killing it in the sales department.
Yeah.
But the problem is that they're there for themselves. They're not there for the company,
Mm.
which means that they can't possibly be put into management or leadership because that's not what they're cut out for. They may
Mm.
be amazing salespeople, but that doesn't mean you should make them head of sales.
But they usually become a leader, don't they? And then they don't get
They
trained to be a
do, they
leader.
do.
Yeah.
Correct. And the
Mm.
problem is leadership is arguably, some people say that it can be taught. I think that it probably can, but I think it takes significantly longer as a skill to teach than most of the other things. I think most leaders are born versus being taught. There was a whole thing in my MBA about this, but I think I landed on born over taught for leadership.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think there is some innate traits that go along with it, but I've seen many leaders become leaders because they're high performers, but they're not necessarily good at leading people. And then I've seen them develop and learn because they've
Yeah,
had the support and they've had guidance. However, some of the courses they go on, they'll be thrown loads of these philosophies, and I don't agree with throwing leadership philosophies because it never ever caters for the personality that that leader's supposed to be leading. However, I
yeah,
do connect it to like a parent, right? Everyone, I think we all have the capacity to be a leader, like we all have the capacity to be a parent, you know, aside any issues that you might have. Um, but excuse my ignorance there, but I think not everybody wants to be a parent and not everybody wants to be a leader, but sometimes
yeah,
are in that, they find themselves in that situation. And
yeah,
and then on the flip side, which can be controversial, not everybody should be a parent. And I see that. I'm sure many teachers around the world have
yeah,
seen children that, the adults don't deserve those children in their life because they just treat them so poorly. And,
yeah,
and the same with leaders, they shouldn't be leaders. You
yeah.
know what I mean? So it's a difficult one. That's how I connect it. So, but we all learn how to be parents along the way, and same with leaders.
Yeah.
But as long as it doesn't come at the cost of the people they're supposed to inspire every day, you know?
Oh, yeah, that's true. If you're an only child or the oldest child, you may have a disagreement that it had no impact on you. But
Yeah,
I'm the middle, and there's a lot of theories about older, younger, and middle childs or children. But yes, the other thing that Simon Sinek's pointed out that I hadn't quite realized is that leadership is actually, it's kind of a terrible word for what it is. Because leaders lead people by pushing them in the sense of by supporting them, so being underneath them. They're actually there to support the people who are there doing the job.
mm,
Leadership implies being at the top or being in front, and that's actually the wrong place. They're supposed to be behind, pushing people forwards.
mm,
So, and it's not until I saw something on LinkedIn about that that it really kind of clicked in my brain, going, "Oh, yeah, okay, so that's actually how you become a better leader. Is not by It's not even by leading by example. It's by pushing people to do their best with what they've got and really uncover those strengths
mm,
more than trying to force them into doing something that they can't do
mm.
naturally."
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's the reason I think he's great as a leader.
yeah. No, some good insights for sure. Let's circle back to that word independence. Then you mentioned it
Let's do
earlier.
it.
Sorry.
Let's do
Let's do it.
it.
Where does independence play in your life then?
Oh, everywhere. Um, at every possible turn. Yeah, from everything, right? I like spending time by myself. I find it's very reflective. I Even when I travel, right? So if I travel and I'm traveling with other people, it gives me more anxiety than traveling by myself. I enjoy doing things myself. I'm more relaxed when I do it. And even in business, right? I will quite happily just push forwards and not leave the rest of the team, in the lurch. But if there's something like a project that really needs to be done, I'm quite happy to just sit down and knuckle it out myself. That's never really been an issue.
Hmm.
Um, I've always been a bit of an independent person. When I was 14, I think. Oh, no, maybe not 14, maybe 15. So at 14, I was in boarding school. At 15, I was in foster care. And that's nothing to do. It wasn't really anything to do with my parents. It was just because I craved that I need to be able to make my own decisions for myself. I need to kind of figure out what's right, what's wrong, what hurts and what doesn't. And typically learning by falling over has very much been my style. Throughout the years, I don't tend to plan. I tend to kind of just accept that there will be consequences when things go wrong, and that's how I learn. And independence is a great way of finding that out.
That's an unusual situation to find yourself in, because when you said that on the pre-chat, I found that fascinating that you took yourself to foster care. Why would you
Yes.
take yourself to foster care when? Because I was expecting something about your parents to come through and that you had a fight or something. You were taken away through the authorities, but that was not the case at all,
No,
was it?
no, there was nothing like that. My parents got divorced when I was very young, and I kind of moved from one place to the other, never really settling in. I was like, I'd go to school and whatever else, and typically I would do 1 year at each parent's house, and then I would move back. That was kind of the timeline that it followed.
That's a change, isn't it?
Um,
Quite for a young. I will paint a picture for us then. How old were you, and where were you in? Whereabouts was this happening? Because we were both from the UK, but you didn't really grow up in the UK, did you?
I didn't. No, I grew up in France. Just to add to the more confusion. So I've been to a bunch of different schools. The divorce happened when I was, I want to say six, maybe 6 or 7. Um, and so I spent quite a few years at my mum's place after the divorce, and then from the age of, I want to say 12, maybe. I bounced from one parent's house to the other more or less every year for the next 5 or 6 years, um, and eventually ended up back in the UK when I was 15.
With who?
After with my dad.
With your dad. So he
Yep.
decided to move back to the UK, and you went with him.
No, so he moved back to the UK, and then I moved over to him. But
Right.
so there was there was a bit of a gap year in the middle where I was living in boarding school, and that was kind of some of the most continuously constant time that I had, where things didn't really change that much. But at that point, I was technically living at my mum's house, but I was there on weekends. So when I went back to school, I was doing my own thing, and this was independence. It's boarding school. You do pretty much whatever you want, whenever you want, provided it's within the rules. Which I was also not great at following. And then I moved. So then I moved back to the UK when I was 15. So straight after boarding school, pretty much.
So you just
Yeah.
said you didn't follow many rules at schools. Were you looking for something? Were you a naughty boy at this boarding school?
Yes. I have no other words for it than just yes.
Well, share with us
I
how.
like pushing boundaries, particularly ones that are imposed by other people. Um, I like knowing where the limits are, like where the edge of the box is. I don't like playing within the box when I know that the box could be bigger or better or a different shape. I like trying to push the box to where I want it to be, and then I just leave it there. Um, if it needs to be pushed any further, I do that again. So
What do you still do
following
that
rules for
now?
me has been very difficult. Not so much, because I've made my box, so I know where the edges of it are. I know where the boundaries of it are. I do still push the boundaries occasionally, but it's typically when I have to, not because I want to. So things like studying time, for instance. I know that I'm supposed to get 8 hours of sleep. I could probably count on one hand the number of nights I've had 8 hours sleep in the last 3 months. It's not very often. So I know that it's something that I shouldn't be doing, but I do it out of necessity, not because I want to. Um, but yeah, I used to quite enjoy breaking the rules. Now I've kind of come to the realization that some of them are there for your own good. Some of them kind of arbitrary, but yeah, I tend to follow them now. I don't need extra trouble.
Well,
So,
no,
so
not when you're a bit older.
I
Absolutely not.
now I do what I have to. The consequences are much worse, so I tend not to.
So back
Yes.
at the boarding school, then push the boundaries for me. What sort of things did you do to break the rules?
Oh, I ran away from school on Wednesday afternoons. I occasionally got drunk. Occasionally there were drugs involved. There were lots of lots of things that probably shouldn't have happened and probably happened more often than you think. Um, yeah, there was a lot of stuff. We actually had a supervisor for the floor that I was on, and one night we took a mattress from a spare bed and put it up against his door, and then basically just put duct tape across the mattress to the wall so he couldn't actually get out of his room. And these were things that I found entertaining at the time, right? And now I'd look at that, and if somebody did that to me as an adult, I'd be pretty upset. Um, so I now understand that there are other sides to these things, as opposed to just having one-sided giggles as it may have been at the time. That there are consequences, and people do have feelings, and that you have to do what you have to do, but also you don't always have to do these things.
Was that
Yeah.
a boy being silly because he was being silly, or was it a little boy looking for something that was missing from his life, do you think? Now you're old and can reflect on that type of thing.
It's a very good question. The answer is I'm not really sure. I don't really feel like I've always kind of felt like I've been missing something, but that's always been there.
Hmm.
Um, but the proof is I don't do it now. So, and I haven't really found the thing that's missing. So maybe it was attention. Maybe it's just because I wanted to be silly. Um, Maybe it was just peer pressure. I don't know. It could have been any of these things.
What do you think the feeling is towards what's missing at the moment then?
I have no idea. I actually, it's not entirely true. I think that a level of wholeness in my life is what I'm missing. A sense of stability, a sense of that warm comfort that you get from your partner, that everything's going to be fine, everything's going to work itself out, is something that I haven't ever really had, because of the amount of chaos that my life has been through over the last 20 years. That the sense of comfort, warmth, and security have typically been missing in my life. Yeah.
I mean, painting that picture based on even on the short time that we've been talking, it sounds like it's pretty clear to me that you never really had a stable place to be that called home, and usually in a child's life it would be what, 18, 20 odd years,
Give or take.
give or take, right? Till a kid moves out
Yeah.
of their home, with whether it's with one mother, one father, but with you were bouncing around, and then you're put into um, boarding school, and then going back to
Yeah.
your point earlier, you took yourself off to a foster home, which I
Yeah.
obviously have never come across that story, and I've interviewed a lot of people, and I've not even come close to, again, many traumas, very many serious problems that these people have been through, and still are dealing with it really, really well now. But there was nothing there that would have presented that would suggest why you'd take yourself off. Where did that thought process? I'm trying to put myself in your. How old were you when you put yourself into that foster?
16.
I mean,
So,
I'm on the verge of
so I,
being free, right?
yeah,
Going out into the world and even renting
pretty
my own
much.
place. So why take you off
And
yourself? Were you looking for a
and
mother and a father to be there in the same home? Was it maybe? I don't know.
nope,
No?
nope.
Okay. You
It
seem
was
pretty
it was
crystal clear on it.
it was remarkably simple, and actually, you almost covered it earlier, where I was 16 and I was almost on the verge of freedom. And with independence comes a lack of patience, typically,
Mm.
um, particularly for things that require like a long length of time, like 2 years, for instance, the difference between 16 and 18, where you live at home or you live outside. I didn't want to wait that 2 year period. I wanted to move out and start my life. And I couldn't do that whilst I was living at home, um, particularly when, at that point, I was still kind of recovering from the things that I'd either done to myself or had been done to me over the previous years. There was a lot of things that had kind of been undealt with, and me putting myself in a again form of independence was okay. How do I move out? How at 16 do I make this sustainable? How do I move out? How do I get my own place, get my own space where people know that if it's in that corner of the room that it belongs to me, and I know that it will be there when I come back. You can't necessarily do that if you have siblings. and I pretty much just wanted out.
What was
I
undealt
wanted my
with
own
then?
thing. I guess just the part of the part of the stuff that was undealt with was very much the trauma of that I put myself through by moving back and forth constantly. It's very disruptive, both educational and from a social perspective. So one of the things I've noticed is that I have no problem making friends. I have no problem starting conversations, approaching people, because actually every time you go to a new school or every time you go to a new city, you meet new people. So
Mm.
you have no choice. You become very good at making friends very easily, very early on. Um, but part of that also means that you never form any deep roots. So one of the friends that I've had the longest, I've known him for 5 years. Right, I don't have that childhood friend that I've known since I was three.
Mm.
I don't have that family home that I grew up in for the last 10 years or 20 years. I don't have that small town like I know, like the back of my hand. I don't have any of this foundational stuff.
Mm.
I just have, not to sound like Liam Neeson, but I just have a certain set of skills that just allows me to fit into society a little bit easier
Mm.
from a social skill perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the going into foster care, and you said you were recovering from certain things, was it also how was it when you say I'm picturing like the drugs that you put yourself through at the college? Was that part of it, or was that
Yeah.
just yeah? Okay.
Yeah, a little bit. Look, I at that point I kind of just needed to figure out what my life was going to look like and what I wanted it to look like, um, and that involved, it still involves finishing school. I still finished high school, but at the same time I was also working. I started off ironically in Kumon, which is a teacher's education kind of teacher's assistant outside of school program.
Mm.
And then I moved on to bar work, and that's when things got a little worse because at that point I discovered alcohol. That was not a good. That was too soon. Um, and then things kind of started to level out after a while. Things got a little bit better. I got my, I understood how renting worked, how buying things worked, what money really meant as opposed to just bills.
Mm.
That there was a due process, but nobody was really there to teach me all this stuff. This was stuff I had to figure out, which again is the falling over on occasion and kind of figuring out how stuff works. Gravity hurts, but so does not having enough money to pay for your phone bill at the end of the month. So
Mm.
you quickly start to figure out these things, and figuring out these things was part of the growth process that I was looking to find in my life.
How long did you stay? Going back to, we will come back to that part. But what? How long did you stay
Mm-hmm.
in the foster care for? Join us tomorrow to hear more from today's incredible guests and learn valuable insights to help you lead your own way. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you then.